The Islamic militant group ISIS, formerly known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and recently rebranded as the so-called Islamic State, is the stuff of nightmares. They are ruthless, fanatical killers on a mission, and that mission is to wipe out anyone and everyone from any other religion or belief system and to impose Sharia law. The mass executions, beheadings, and even crucifixions that they are committing as they work towards this goal are flaunted like badges of pride, videotaped and uploaded for the whole world to see. This is the new face of evil. Would it interest you to know who helped these psychopaths rise to power? Would it interest you to know who armed them, funded them, and trained them? Would it interest you to know why? This story makes a lot more sense if we start in the middle. So we'll begin with the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The Libyan revolution was Barack Obama's first major foreign intervention. It was portrayed as an extension of the Arab Spring, and NATO involvement was framed in humanitarian terms. The fact that the CIA was actively working to help the Libyan rebels topple Gaddafi was no secret, nor were the airstrikes that Obama ordered against the Libyan government. However, little was said about the identity or the ideological leanings of the Libyan rebels. Not really surprising considering the fact that the leader of the Libyan rebels later admitted that his fighters included Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists who had fought against Allied troops in Iraq. These jihadist militants from Iraq were part of what national security analysts commonly referred to as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And remember, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was ISIS before it was rebranded. With the assistance of US and NATO intelligence and air support, the Libyan rebels captured Gaddafi and summarily executed him in the street, all the while enthusiastically chanting, Allah Akbar. For many who had bought the official line about how these rebels were freedom fighters aiming to establish a liberal democracy in Libya, this was the beginning of the end of their illusions. Prior to the US and NATO-backed intervention, Libya had the highest standard of living of any country in Africa. This according to the UN's Human Development Index ratings for 2010. However, in the years following the coup, the country descended into chaos, with extremism and violence running rampant. Libya is now widely regarded as a failed state. Now, after Gaddafi was overthrown, the Libyan armories were looted and massive quantities of weapons were sent by the Libyan rebels to Syria. The weapons, which included anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles, were smuggled into Syria through Turkey, a NATO ally. The Times of London reported on the arrival of the shipment on September 14, 2012. This was just 3 days after Ambassador Chris Stevens was killed in the attack on the US Embassy in Benghazi. Chris Stevens had served as the US government's liaison to the Libyan rebels since April of 2011. While a great deal of media attention is focused on the fact that the State Department did not provide adequate security at the consulate and was slow to send assistance when the attack started, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh released an article in April of 2014 which exposed a classified agreement between the CIA, Turkey, and the Syrian rebels to create what was referred to as a rat line. The rat line was a covert network used to channel weapons and ammunition from Libya through southern Turkey and across the Libyan border. Funding was provided by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. With Stevens dead, any direct US involvement in that arms shipment was buried, and Washington would continue to claim that they had not sent heavy weaponry into Syria. It was at this time that jihadist fighters from Libya began flooding into Syria as well, and not just low-level militants. Many were experienced commanders who had fought in multiple theaters. The US and its allies were now fully focused on taking down Assad's government in Syria. As in Libya, this regime change was to be framed in terms of human rights. And now overt support began to supplement the backdoor channels. The growing jihadist presence was swept under the rug and covered up. However, as the rebels gained strength, the reports of war crimes and atrocities that they were committing began to create a bit of a public relations problem for Washington. It then became standard policy to insist that US support was only being given to what they referred to as moderate rebels. This distinction, however, had no basis in reality. In an interview given in April of 2014, FSA Commander Jamal Maroof admitted that his fighters regularly conduct joint operations with al-Nusra. Al-Nusra is the official al-Qaeda branch in Syria. This statement is further validated in an interview given in June of 2013 by Colonel Abdel Basset al-Tawil, commander of the FSA's Northern Front. In this interview, he openly discusses his ties with al-Nusra and expresses his desire to see Syria ruled by Sharia law.
أما فيما يخص بعض الفصائل التي مثلا يطالب الغرب بتصنيفها كمنظمات إرهابية، جبهة النصرة. نعم، نحن نشعر أن هذه الجبهة بمكان ما هي يمكن الحوار معها. حول نعم، حول طبيعة الدولة القادمة، حول شكل الدولة القادمة، حول إمكانية هذه البلد على إقامة دولة التي تناسب الجميع. نحن في مكان ما يجب أن نتعاون ويجب أن نتحاور، وأنا على صلة بالجميع، أنا على صلة بالجميع ولا أخفي سرا بذلك، حتى فيما يخص يعني الأخوة في جبهة النصرة، ونتعاون في أمكنة كثيرة.
ماذا تؤيدون أنتم؟ ما هو شكل الدولة الذي تؤيدون؟
أنا بصراحة العبارة أنا أرغب في دولة يعني يكون طابعها حضاري، لكن أن يكون شرعها إسلامي.
Moderate rebels? Well, it's complicated. Not that this should really come as any surprise. Reuters had reported in 2012 that the FSA's command was dominated by Islamic extremists. And the New York Times had reported that same year that the majority of the weapons that Washington was sending to Syria were ending up in the hands of jihadists. For 2 years, the US government knew that this was happening, but they kept doing it. And the FSA's ties to al-Nusra are just the beginning. In June of 2014, al-Nusra merged with ISIS at the border between Iraq and Syria. So, to review, the FSA is working with al-Nusra is working with ISIS, and the US has been sending money and weapons to the FSA, even though they've known since 2012 that most of these weapons are ending up in the hands of extremists. Do the math. In that context, the sarin gas attacks of 2013, which turned out to have been committed by the Syrian rebels, makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? If it wasn't enough that UN investigators, Russian investigators, and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh all pinned that crime on Washington's proxies, the rebels themselves threatened the West that they would expose what really happened if they were not given more advanced weaponry within 1 month.
أعطي فرصة شهر واحد للمجتمع الدولي كي يتحرك ويعطي الذخيرة والسلاح للثوار والجيش الحر في الأرض كي نستطيع أن ندحر هذا النظام المجرم. شهر واحد. إذا وجدنا أن هذا المجتمع الدولي سيتابع في تخاذله تجاه ثورتنا، سنفصح عما لدينا من إثباتات، وأنا أقول ذلك وأعتقد أنك تعرف جيدا أننا صادقون فيما أقول.
This threat was made on June 10th, 2013. In what can only be described as an amazing coincidence, just 9 days later, the rebels received their first official shipment of heavy weapons in Aleppo. After the second sarin gas fiasco, which was also exposed and therefore failed to garner public support for airstrikes, the US continued to increase its training and support for the rebels. In February of 2014, Haaretz reported that the US and its allies in the region, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel, were in the process of helping the Syrian rebels plan and prepare for a massive attack in the south. According to Haaretz, Israel had also provided direct assistance in military operations against Assad 4 months prior. Then in May of 2014, PBS ran a report in which they interviewed rebels who were trained by the US in Qatar. According to those rebels, they were being trained to finish off soldiers who survived attacks. Quote, "They trained us to ambush regime or enemy vehicles and to cut off the road. They also trained us on how to attack a vehicle, raid it, retrieve information or weapons and munitions, and how to finish off soldiers still alive after an ambush." This is a blatant violation of the Geneva Conventions. It also runs contrary to conventional military strategy. In conventional military strategy, soldiers are better off left wounded, because this ends up costing the enemy more resources. Executing captured enemy soldiers is the kind of tactic you use when you want to strike terror in the hearts of the enemy. It also just happens to be standard operating procedure for ISIS. 1 month after this report, in June of 2014, ISIS made its dramatic entry, crossing over the Syrian border into Iraq, capturing Mosul, Baiji, and almost reaching Baghdad. The internet was suddenly flooded with footage of drive-by shootings, large-scale death marches, and mass graves. And of course, any Iraqi soldier that was captured was executed. Massive quantities of American military equipment was seized during that operation. ISIS took entire truckloads of Humvees. They took helicopters, tanks, and artillery. They photographed and videotaped themselves and advertised what they were doing on social media. And yet, for some reason, Washington didn't even try to stop them. U.S. military doctrine clearly calls for the destruction of military equipment and supplies when friendly forces cannot prevent them from falling into enemy hands. But that didn't happen here. ISIS was allowed to carry this equipment out of Iraq and into Syria unimpeded. The U.S. military had the means to strike these convoys, but they didn't lift a finger, even though they'd been launching drone strikes in Pakistan that same week. Why would they do that? Though Obama plays the role of a weak, indecisive liberal president, and while pundits from the right have had a lot of fun with that image, this is just a facade. Some presidents, like George W. Bush, rely on overt military aggression. Obama gets the same job done, but he prefers covert means. Not really surprising considering that Zbigniew Brzezinski was his mentor.
Somebody who has over decades trained some of the most prominent foreign policy specialists, not just in the Democratic Party, but has trained a number who ended up in the Republican Party as well. He is one of our most outstanding scholars, one of our most outstanding thinkers. He has proven to be an outstanding friend and somebody who I've learned an immense amount from. And for him to support me in this campaign and then be willing to come out here to Iowa is a testimony to his generosity. So if everybody could please give Dr. Brzezinski another round of applause.
Those who know their history will remember that Zbigniew Brzezinski was directly involved in the funding and arming of Islamic extremists in Pakistan and Afghanistan in order to weaken the Soviets.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes, your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
By the way, Osama bin Laden just happened to be one of these anti-Soviet freedom fighters that the U.S. was funding and arming. This operation is no secret at this point, nor are the unintended side effects.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work.
Officially, the U.S. government's arming and funding of the Mujahideen was a response to the Soviet invasion in December of 1979. However, in his memoir entitled From the Shadows, Robert Gates, director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., and Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, revealed that the U.S. actually began the covert operation 6 months prior with the express intention of luring the Soviets into a quagmire. The strategy worked. The Soviets invaded, and the 10 years of war that followed are considered by many historians as being one of the primary causes of the fall of the USSR. This example doesn't just establish precedent. What we're seeing happen in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria right now is actually a continuation of an old story. Al-Nusra and ISIS are ideological and organizational descendants of these same extremist elements that the US government made use of 30 years ago. The US then went on to create a breeding ground for these extremists by invading Iraq in 2003. Had it not been for the vacuum of power left by the removal and execution of Saddam, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, aka ISIS, would not exist. And had it not been for Washington's attempt at toppling Assad by arming, funding, and training shadowy militant groups in Syria, there is no way that ISIS would have been capable of storming into Iraq in June of 2014. On every level, no matter how you cut it, ISIS is a product of the US government's twisted and decrepit foreign policy. Now, all of this may seem a bit contradictory to you as you watch the drums of war against ISIS begin to beat louder and louder, and as the airstrikes against them are gradually widened. Why would the US help a terrorist organization get established, only to attack them later? Well, why did the CIA put Saddam Hussein in power in 1963? Why did the US government back Saddam in 1980 when he launched a war of aggression against Iran, even though they knew that he was using chemical weapons? Why did the US fund and arm Islamic extremists in Afghanistan against the Soviets? There's a pattern here, if you look closely. This is a tried and true geopolitical strategy. Step 1. Build up a dictator or extremist group, which can then be used to wage proxy wars against opponents. During this stage, any crimes committed by these proxies are swept under the rug. Step 2. When these nasty characters have outlived their usefulness, that's when it's time to pull out all that dirt from under the rug and start publicizing it 24/7. This obviously works best when the public has no idea how these bad guys came to power. Step 3. Finally, when the public is practically begging the government to do something, a solution is proposed. Usually, the solution involves military intervention, the loss of certain liberties, or both. ISIS is extremely useful. They have essentially done Washington's dirty work by weakening Assad. In 2014, while the news cycle is focused almost exclusively on Ukraine and Russia, ISIS made major headway in Syria, and as of August, they controlled 35% of the country. Since ISIS is largely based in Syria, this gives the US a pretext to move into Syria. Sooner or later, the US will extend the airstrikes into Assad's backyard. And when they do, US officials are already making it clear that both ISIS and the Syrian government will be targeted. That, after all, is the whole point. Washington may allow ISIS to capture a bit more territory first, but the writing is on the wall, and it has been for some time now. The Obama administration has repeatedly insisted that this will never lead to boots on the ground. However, the truth of the matter is that anyone who understands anything about military tactics knows full well that ISIS cannot be defeated by airstrikes alone. In response to airstrikes, ISIS will merely disperse and conceal their forces. ISIS is not an established state power which can be destroyed by knocking out key government buildings and infrastructure. These are guerrilla fighters who cut their teeth in urban warfare. To significantly weaken them, the war will have to involve ground troops. But even this is a lost cause. US troops could certainly rout ISIS in street-to-street battles for some time, and they might even succeed in fully occupying Syria and Iraq for a number of years. But eventually, they will have to leave. And when they do, it should be obvious what will come next. The puppets that the US government has installed in the various countries that they have brought down in recent years have proven without exception to be utterly incompetent and corrupt. No one that Washington places in power will be capable of maintaining stability in Syria. Period. Right now, Assad is the last bastion of stability in the region. He is the last chance they have for a moderate, non-sectarian government, and he is the only hope of anything even remotely resembling democracy in the foreseeable future. If Assad falls, Islamic extremists will take the helm. They will impose Sharia law, and they will do everything in their power to continue spreading their ideology as far and wide as they can. If the world truly wants to stop ISIS, there's only one way to do it. 1. First and foremost, the US government and its allies must be heavily pressured to cut all support to the rebels who are attempting to topple Assad. Even if these rebels that the US is funding and arming were moderate, and they're not, the fact that they are forcing Assad to fight a war on multiple fronts only strengthens ISIS. This is lunacy. 2. The Syrian government should be provided with financial support, equipment, training, and intelligence to enable them to turn the tide against ISIS. This is their territory. They should be the ones to reclaim it. Now, obviously this support isn't going to come from the US or any NATO country, but there are a number of nations who have a strategic interest in preventing another regime change and chaotic aftermath. If these countries respond promptly, as in right now, they could preempt a US intervention. And as long as this support does not include the presence of foreign troops, doing so will greatly reduce the likelihood of a major confrontation down the road. 3. The US government and its allies should be aggressively condemned for their failed regime change policies, and the individuals behind these decisions should be charged for war crimes. This would have to be done on a nation-by-nation level, since the UN has done nothing but enable NATO aggression. While this may not immediately result in these criminals being arrested, it would send a message. This can be done. Malaysia has already proven this by convicting the Bush administration of war crimes in absentia. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds fine and good, but what does it have to do with me? I can't influence this situation. That perspective is quite common. For most people, it's paralyzing. But the truth is, we can influence this. We've done it before, and we can do it again. I'll be honest with you though, it's not going to be easy. To succeed, we're going to have to start thinking strategically. Like it or not, this is a chess game. If we really want to rock the boat, we have to start reaching out to people in positions of influence. This could mean talking to broadcasters at your local radio station, newspaper, or TV station. Or it could mean contacting influential bloggers, celebrities, business figures, or government officials. Reaching out to current serving military and young people who may be considering joining up is also important. But even if it's just your neighbor or your coworker, every single person that we can reach brings us closer to critical mass. If you get discouraged, just remember what's at stake.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
If this message resonates with you, then spread it. If you want to see the big picture, trust me, we've got some very interesting reports coming. Subscribe to Storm Clouds Gathering on YouTube and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+. Also be sure to go to our website, scgnews.com, and sign up for email updates.